Welcome to Flying Upstream, the podcast where we uncover the choices, practices, and wisdom that defy mainstream conventions. I'm Kristyn.
And I'm Luisa. And together we're here to illuminate the alternative paths that have shaped human experiences through the ages. In each episode, we'll examine ways to move beyond societal norms. We're passionate about how timeless wisdom and unique lifestyle choices can foster healthier, sustainable, and enriching lives.
Join us as we navigate, challenge, and celebrate the beauty and insight of walking the road less traveled. If you've ever felt like you're flying north for the winter while everyone else is flying south, you found your flock.
Hey there, free spirits. We are so glad to have you back for another episode of the Flying Upstream podcast.
That's right. Whether you're tuning in for the first time or you've been with us from the start, remember to follow, like, and share.
Yes, and in today's episode, we have the pleasure of having Kema Grace as our guest. Kema Grace is a spiritual life coach, a death doula, and healing artist with a true passionate purpose for service and caregiving.
After an extensive healing journey to liberate themselves from suffering and building an empowered spiritual life, they offer healing membership, coaching, and guidance to help others to free themselves and live in alignment with their true heart's purpose. Kema, welcome to the Flying Upstream podcast.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
We're so excited to have you. And Kristyn and I had a little bit of a conversation as we were preparing for this episode because we're both extremely excited to learn about the Death Cafe. So you're a death doula.
Okay.
And I have this really long question for you. I'd love to break it down by asking you first to define what a death doula is, because this was new to me. So I imagine it may be new to some of our listeners too.
Yeah, death doula is kind of exactly what the words sound like. It's like where we have a birth doula that is non-medical assistance that's trained in understanding the signs and the labors of giving birth and helping the transition into life. The death doula is the non-medical assistance at the end of life, and we are trained in what we call the labors of death. So there's specific phases that people and animals go through in the dying process, and it helps to alleviate the stress for the family that's not educated in this experience. Each death doula does have their own particular role that they play. And so one of the things that I love is exploring people's belief systems. Like, I'm open to all belief systems, and I just love if someone wants a spiritual book read to them or something like that, or explore what they believe is going to happen after death. That's something that really lights me up. And then, as you mentioned, for death cafes, since you were interested in it, that's another thing that's been really a passion of mine within the death doula training, is to begin talking about death, to begin taking it out from the closet, to begin bringing it back into our focus, because it hasn't been a long time since we had community surrounding death and that kind of understanding. And so for me, it's coming together, talking about death. It's bringing death up in maybe unconventional situations, or with my conversations with friends. I talk about it all the time, and I think that we need this. It's almost like immersion therapy to get back to comfortability with facing that thing that we are hiding right now.
I love that. I have a follow-up. You mentioned something beautiful that I had never even thought about before, and it's community around death. Like,
Mm-hmm.
when we look back in history, like you mentioned, that was a thing that's not a thing anymore. And so it sounds like your weekly death cafe that you host, is that what y'all do? Like, you gather and you eat cake and you drink tea and you discuss death?
Yeah, and sometimes wine. They serve champagne that early. I have someone that drinks during our meetings. But yeah, so the weekly Death Cafe, that's one of my visions here. I'm in Santa Fe, New Mexico, but something that maybe can start it spreading throughout the world is to build community that is equipped to at least talk about and face our mortality, because death shouldn't be where two people that are working full-time jobs have to take care of their loved one and are stressed out and unable to find the time. This death process should be something that people in the community are equipped to help and step in like they used to. And so the more people that are equipped to talk about it, face it, and build maybe a sense of comfort around it. I don't know if it's ever going to be comfortable for a lot of people, but to build that community is to allow us to have people that can step in and help it when it's, not such an individualized thing where people are working full time. They don't have the time to do it.
I completely agree. I have a young daughter who's 6, and we've had nobody in our immediate family pass away, but some acquaintances that we've known, and she's so curious about it. And my husband and I have done our best to explain it in a child-friendly way, and I know that it's still not answering all her questions, right?
Mhm.
Because we don't talk about it every single day. It's not part of every day's conversation in our daily life. So I can appreciate that you're sending this call back to times long ago where it kind of was. And so
Mhm.
much so that it was, I don't want to ever call it no big deal that somebody passes away, but it was a different experience because people knew what to expect for the most part. You knew what it was like. You'd seen it and been part of it at times. And so it just wasn't this scary big thing. And it sounds like that's really what you're working towards with all this.
Yeah, for that, and the thing is with kids, they know a lot more than we give them credit for with all topics across the board, and that's why when you do try to cover something up, it kinda causes a disillusionment within the child because they know. They have a feeling, they have a natural relationship with that aspect, and that's including death. Finding the right words to communicate it is going to be a case by case situation. But yeah, it's recalling our and different cultures around the world that have different perspectives and different space that they hold surrounding death. But definitely in the Western world, I don't have an experience outside of America. So for me and my personal experience in the United States, we sterilize death so much that it just becomes the best example I can give is when you don't fly on an airplane for a long time, then the next time you take an airplane, it's terrifying. And that's a little bit what it's like for me is that we don't face our mortality every day. So once it hits us, once someone dies, whether it's been expected or it's an accident, we don't have the emotional capacity or the tools or the community to deal with it. And that's something that has to change.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that has to change. I also think on the flip side of that, that if our mortality was something that was more present in our everyday life, perhaps we could start to have a little bit more gratitude in our day to day
Mhm.
and just be grateful for the experiences that we do get to enjoy before that time comes. You said it so beautifully, like sterilized death. I had never heard it that way. I know that you offer a spiritual life coaching program that sounds like it's extremely transformative.
Mhm.
Is that something that you will help people with? So I know you have the Death Cafe, but is there any other education that you provide to help people understand and kind of be more present with the idea of death and all of the knowledge that surrounds it?
Yeah, well, as far as the spiritual life coaching goes, it is a little bit of a separate thing from the death doula work that I do. Although I do believe that every life coach is a death doula in their own right because we're working with metaphorical deaths. We're working with people that are going through huge transitions. And so if you take it from that perspective and you understand the grief that's involved, you're going to go through the dying process, the emotional process of bereavement. And so if you take that understanding, it does help. But I believe with the spiritual life coaching, the way that it does help others to become more holistic and understanding of the life and death process is the same way that any spiritual practice does with our meditations, with the breath work, with understanding who we are, with building a relationship with spirit. All of that stuff does help alleviate the intensity of our fear of death. And something that you talked about before too about honoring our mortality and addressing it daily, it does really help people to live more fully. That's the one thing. Fear of death doesn't prevent death, it just prevents life. And so the thing that I've noticed, everyone that works in death care are the most life affirming people. Like I don't even swat mosquitoes. I honor all forms of life. And I think that's something that I see together. We honor life, although we help people in the dying process as well.
right around the lines of honoring our mortality. One of the things when I went through my own spiritual awakening that I learned about that all made sense, but like
Mhm.
I hadn't heard the words or read the words before, were universal laws. And I wonder, in your opinion, what is the one universal law that could help us appreciate our mortality more?
That's a good question. One thing that I like to work with my spiritual life coaching clients is the fact that there are very few actual universal laws. As I'm sure all of us in this gathering at least know, like you don't have working 9 to 5 to barely survive is not a universal law. So when you realize that you have a choice in this sense, then you can break free from that conditioning and that story that society has told. As far as universal laws go, I don't know if it's a law with a specific label or term or name to it. But one thing that I like to remember is that the way that we experience the dark is by the light being present. The way that we experience light is by the dark being present. If the dark isn't present, we wouldn't experience light, which means if there was no eternal aspect of ourselves, in existence, we wouldn't be able to experience fleeting things. We wouldn't be able to experience something dying. So the very fact that we experience ourselves or anything in this world dying clues us into the fact that there is an underlying eternal essence to all of creation. And so for me, that's kind of like that contrast. The contrast is here we see death, and we experience it. That means there's something eternal underlying everything, in my opinion.
I completely agree with that. A wise woman once told me that you think of a rose as like one of the most beautiful flowers. It's widely considered to represent love, beauty, happiness. But if you look at a rose, as the petals get smaller and smaller in the middle is very dark because you can't
Mhm,
see into it. So even something as beautiful as a rose has its darkness and it has its thorns.
mhm,
So yeah, you're right. They go hand in hand. We can't always have the happiness and the joy without
mhm,
sadness and death.
mhm.
They connect absolutely. I really like that. I'm a little curious to know a little more about what people may be able to do if they want to take a first step towards exploring their own thoughts and feelings about death in a way that enhances how they live. Because for most of us, it is a taboo topic in some ways.
Mhm,
It's we don't talk about it. Hush, hush, ooh, like that. And so,
mhm.
how do you recommend people begin those conversations with their family and friends?
One big resource, I'm gonna mention the death cafes again. So if you go to deathcafe.com, you can find so many hosted in-person or virtual death cafes, maybe in your own location or something online that's across the world that's a community you never thought you would step foot into. And the people that have come into my death cafes and received the most benefit from it are the people that are terrified of their mortality. They're terrified of talking about and experiencing or exploring, not experiencing their death. We'll get there when we get there. But but so Death Cafe would be like the number one because it's people from all walks of life. It's non-judgmental. It's free for anyone because death is free for well it's not it's expensive these days but that's one way googling information about it, reading books. There's plenty of books out there, reaching out to someone like me or someone that you know if you can find an Instagram. Social media is great for that. There's so many resources online, Instagram, YouTube videos. Ask a Mortician, I love her, and she just is such a, I don't know if you know Caitlin Doty, but Ask a Mortician on YouTube. She just has such a warm way of offering information about deaths and curiosities about deaths throughout our history and that kind of stuff. And the more that you listen and talk about it, the more that it lets that guard down a little bit.
It's wonderful. I don't remember the name of the book, but I remember hearing that there was this nurse or something who did like the biggest regret of the dying or something to
Mhm.
that effect. But along those lines, what has been your experience? What do you see people needing really at the end of their lives in your experience as a death doula?
I think that one of the biggest things that people benefit from is someone with the ability to truly hold space. So it's someone that's able to be there for them just in being, because in our productivity pusher society, somewhere along the line of living, we have decided that we have to do something, we have to act, we have to be busy to serve someone, to make them feel better, to help them along. And it's about holding space, it's about being non-judgmental and being there who you are in that moment and not having to do anything. I think that's a really big benefit for them. And as you talked about, like, regrets of people who are dying, I think that's a really beneficial thing to look at for anyone that's watching this too. I've heard of that, and I know that they talk about they wish they worked less, they wish they didn't fight with their family as much. That's one thing too, unfinished business. All of these things are things that you can complete early on in life. And so that's another aspect. If you explore your mortality, then maybe you realize that working more than you are playing and enjoying life with your loved ones is not the way to go anymore. You're realizing that this business, you can finish your business long before you die, because that's where the resistance comes in. I've seen it so much where the people that are most resistant to allowing their loved one to go, the people that are putting them on life support, keeping them in a vegetative state, whatever your beliefs are about that is fine. But the ones that are desperately grasping on keeping the person alive are the ones that have the most unfinished business. The ones that have the finished business have come to a loving understanding with their loved one, can just hold the space and allow them to take their own process. So I say do it earlier in your life. Let go of your material possessions. That's another big one. Let go of the stuff that you're carrying in your house. I've seen people that were hoarders, and their loved ones have to take care of all of this stuff, and it really can interact with the grieving process. Some things to file away is good because it gives you a break, because then you're using your analytical mind and you're doing busy work that can help with the grieving process. But if you have a house full to the ceiling with stuff, it makes it so hard for the loved ones. So I think that a practice of letting go of things every once in a while, if you haven't used it in 6 months, a year, then who can benefit from it? You can offer it or even just throw it away. But, consciously, the landfills are another thing. But not to laugh about landfills, but, if you don't laugh, you're just crying, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I really love what you're saying there. And especially because so much of what you're mentioning, anybody can do it. It doesn't require money or all that much
Mhm.
time, perhaps, right? Just make a phone call, send an apology, or close the loop, or say what you need to say before it gets to that point where a situation is
Mhm.
pretty dire.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
finish your business with your loved ones. There's nothing that's worth going to the grave and having unfinished, truly. And it helps the rest of the time afterward. It may be hard. It may be like pulling a band-aid off and grabbing the hair and doing that rip, and it seems painful, but I promise that most situations the fear is more intense than the pain of actually walking through it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I want to switch gears here a little
Mhm,
bit because I know you are a Reiki master
mhm,
and I am a Reiki second degree. So we both know Reiki
mhm,
is such a powerful and expansive healing modality. And you also offer animal Reiki, which is
mhm.
amazing. And I'm totally jealous. You need to tell me everything about it later.
Yeah.
um, and I'm curious, this is such a unique aspect of your practice. And for listeners who might be new to energy healing or they're a little unsure about how it works, how can someone begin to tap into the healing portion of Reiki, both for themselves and maybe for their pets?
Yeah, well, I'd say that if Reiki, this word, is now resonating and ringing a bell for people, I'd suggest researching into it, maybe going for a level one. So the Reiki energy is universal life force energy that channels through your vessel and out your hands, that can be applied by touch or at a distance. It spans space and time. You can send it to the past, to the future. One thing I would say is that we all have innate healing abilities. Sure, there's an attunement process with Reiki, but one thing that you can start today is remember that when you get an injury, especially as a kid, you would put your hand on your injury. That's your innate palm energy healing abilities. So if you're sitting, maybe before you go to bed, place your hands on your chest and just intend to allow healing energy to flow. You don't necessarily have to be attuned to Reiki, but there are huge benefits to being attuned to Reiki, and people have seen that the channels do open. But I'd say just start trusting that you have this innate healing ability and start exploring that, and then see where that leads you. If you're saying, oh, this happened and I felt my heart open and it was this vibration, or, I don't know about everyone else here, but sometimes you're sitting there and you just like, I don't want to use the word
Yes.
painful, but it's almost painful how much I love, you're like, oh my God, I love the world so much it almost hurts. But that kind of thing, when that heart opens, just explore that. Or if you have, hips or knees are really good, sit and just put your hands on your knee, take a bath and do your hands, and intending for the healing energy to flow through. That's the first step I would say, is to not let yourself be be limited by the perceived notion that you have to be attuned before you can do self-healing with Reiki.
That's beautiful. And thank you for sharing such practical tips. And these are all things that we can all do, like in my bathtub and like hold. I have so much, so much to learn with regards to Reiki. And it's really nice to be able to understand it at like this level down here. A master or like Kristen, very well trained in this, like the both of you, but you can just do it simply. I have a
Mhm.
follow up question though, because I'm very interested about this
Yeah.
animal Reiki. So, how does that work with animals?
So with all the Reiki practices, you can use it on animals. So that's something very practical about being attuned level 1, level 2, or master. But there is also now an extension that is a specific animal Reiki, which with its own specific symbol. There's symbols, and so this animal Reiki energy is a little bit more agreeable to them sometimes, but you don't need it in specific. The thing that was beneficial to me about taking the class was, oh, okay, keep your eyes open, because whatever animal you're working on, you don't know if they're going to move around and that kind of thing. But really set the intention. If you're going to sit and pet your animal companion, set the intention that healing energy is flowing through. And oftentimes they'll turn around and offer you their hips. And you'll be like, okay, because especially bigger dogs, that kind of stuff, their hips are can be uncomfortable. They have hip problems sometimes. But for me, in my experience as well, I've always been an animal person, an animal lover. Along with everything else, I work at a elder care and hospice for dogs, horses, and poultry. So I do a lot of Reiki there. There was a husky who tore a cruciate ligament in his knee, and so offering Reiki can help speed up the healing process. And you can tell that the animals really love it. He just sits there and he'll give me this look with his blue eyes, which is just irresistible. Huskies are so beautiful. And so then you sit and do Reiki. You don't want to necessarily touch if it's an injury, like acute pain. You don't want to touch it, but you can hover your hand over it. You can Reiki their food, so you can intend to send healing energy into their food, your water, their water. So there's so much. You can even do an intention where you can sit and intend to send Reiki to any animal across the world that needs your assistance. Like, maybe speaking of the things that are going on with the fires in California right now, you can send Reiki to the fires, the whole situation itself, but all the animals that unfortunately don't have the ability to evacuate the way that humans do, send them healing energy as well, send them peace. It's also good for PTSD in animals that have dealt with abuse. I've worked with a lot of those that come into the animal sanctuary, and it helps them process the abuse as well. One specifically is a dog that came in with a lot of BB welts on his side, so it looked like he was, is sad information to have to talk about, but it looked like he was shot by BBs as a target a lot throughout his life. And so now I do Reiki. He doesn't like being touched there, but I'll hold him and do Reiki in that area to help him get used to loving touch in the spots where he experienced pain.
That is so sweet. Oh my gosh, you're inspiring me. I'm gonna branch out and do animals now.
Do
You're
it.
inspiring me. Yes,
Do
I love
it.
that. I wanna take a step back because I realized we never really asked you about your journey, how you got here.
Oh yeah.
So tell
Yeah.
us, how did you get here? What was that moment for you where you realized you wanted to become a death doula, you wanted to become a Reiki master, work with animals, all of this? What was that journey like?
Oh my gosh. How much time do we have? You know how many versions of me I've been through on this path? I think for starters, I believe that I came into this world knowing how to love, knowing how to heal. I had a very nurtured imagination when I was a child. I grew up homeschooled by a visual artist and a musician. So I didn't have a chance fitting into society, but I had a nurtured imagination. And it's funny because I think of the times I would walk through the mountains of New Mexico when I was 7 or 8 years old, and I would pretend to be a cleric. So I was always pretending to be a magic user that was able to heal, and it's still my number one thing. But when I went to school in Wisconsin, I went to a small town in Wisconsin, and I went into public school after being homeschooled for so long, and had this jarring experience that maybe a lot of us have when you are not quite someone who fits into society, or at least the society where you live, that it's a survival tactic. You have to start telling their stories and start drowning out your own truths of your heart in order to survive, because the teachers, the people of perceived power, everyone, my peer group, I didn't have this friend group for a long time that was supportive. So it was just my immediate family, and everything else was chaos and hell. And when you're going through being 16 years old, everything seems like the most important thing that's ever happened in the history of all of life. And so you have this thing where it's like, I am dying and I have to do something about that. So I felt like I went through a fairly tortured life because I had to close off my heart truths in order to survive and tell the
Mm.
stories of scarcity, the stories of fear and hate versus love, open love, because you have to be afraid of your neighbor and close yourself off and that kind of stuff. And there was a tipping point when I was just stressed out and dealing with being queer in a small Republican town in Wisconsin. And there was just a day that I felt like it was enough. And so I took 150 aspirin with half a bottle of vodka. And the day was proceeding as usual. I was just like pretending I'm working on my work and being bright, because that's really truly who I am. But the moment that really changed for me was in the night. I had called someone, let one friend know that I did that, and their parents called my parents, but my parents didn't address it, which I don't know how parents, thinking back on that, I'm like, I don't know how anyone could do that, but they just let it proceed in its normal, natural process. But in the middle of the night, I remember going upstairs and throwing up in the bathroom, and my parents came in having already known what was going on. And my mom, since I was raised Christian Scientist and outside of the medical institute, my mom actually told me that if I wanted to go to the hospital, she would bring me to the hospital. But if I didn't want to go to the hospital, she wasn't going to force me to go. And so that was a turning point because it was my choice. And I think a lot of people that choose to go by more sudden means, or they're forced to go to the hospital, they don't get this choice to say, oh, I'm meant to live. I choose to live. And so I got to choose life. And so that kind of maybe was the moment that the veil was lifted a little bit for death. And also this belief that I have a reason to be here, whatever it is. Maybe my only purpose in life is to tie my shoes one more time. I don't know what purpose is as far as that goes, but I know that there's a purpose for me to continue living. And that really opened me to a long healing journey. And so it was decades of, it started with numbing with drugs and alcohol, but there was a turning point that I just couldn't deal with being depressed and anxious and stressed and self-hate anymore. And so I just went and meditated in the mountains and I said, I can't do this. I can't do this anymore. And it ended up following breadcrumbs. It came to me, go find a Kundalini yoga class. And through that class, I found sound healing. And through sound healing, I found Reiki and breath work and Buddhism and witchcraft and chaos magic and all these other things. And through decades worth of work, I am now at this place where the reason that it feels like service and caregiving is my divine purpose is because all the work that I've done now, I see what people can do. I see how people can empower and heal themselves. I see that depression and anxiety is alleviatable. At least the weight can be lifted through regular practice, through diet, through exercise. And so after my process, it's just the natural thing is to offer it to other people.
That is as jarring as it is beautiful, right? Because you had to go through, in essence, the experience that most humans have, all of the difficulties, the pain, in order to
Hmm.
heal and be at this place today where now you offer your powerful healing practices to help others. And that is so powerful and absolutely beautiful that you got a choice, because as you were saying that story, full disclosure, I'm a mother, I have two kiddos, and I'm sitting here like, his mother did what? And as you went along with this story, it made sense. I believe, like, as mothers, we really have an understanding when we're tuned into our children to what they need, and it sounds like your mother knew what you needed, and that was choice at that
Hmm.
time. And that's absolutely beautiful. And I'm so glad that you chose
Yeah, me
life,
too.
because we get to experience you. We get to experience you today. And honestly, I'm sure that, as you've just shared, it has been a really big part of what's brought you to this place that you are today, sitting here talking
Yeah.
to us.
Hmm.
Um,
It's a long and hard road.
yeah.
I'm not gonna pretend that the healing process wasn't intense and challenging, but so worth it. And maybe it's my Capricorn stellium where I'm like determined to do it no matter what it takes. So that helped.
I think really just last question is, Kema, with all the powerful healing practices that you share, what do you think is one simple but effective exercise or technique our listeners can try today to start shifting their energy and mindset in a positive direction? You talked a little bit about Reiki. Even this could be about meditation or any other tools that you use, something that our listeners can start doing right this moment.
Yeah, for me, if I was to coach only one thing for the rest of my life, it would be daily silent meditation. It would be build as a meditation practice every single day in the morning before anything. I do it before I drink coffee because I don't want my coffee to be what I'm relying on to shift my energy. And so set up a timer. I use Insight Timer. It's really cool because it tracks your progress. And so it's almost like a workout app where you're like, oh, I did it today. But everyone without question has the ability to create space for daily meditation, and the people that believe that they don't have the time are the ones that especially need it. And so I'd say set up time in the morning. 5 to 15 minutes is enough, and do silent meditation. And I highly suggest doing it without incense, without sound, without any visual stimulus, to sit through it. The side note on that is that silent meditation, when I first started doing it, was possibly the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. I think people think you're going to sit there and clear your mind, and it's the act of clearing your mind, which means that you have to sift through everything that's been going on. And so I always like to think of it as in the cartoon or a TV show. I think Friends, Monica had this where there's a closet that's always locked, that's filled to the brim. And the moment that you open it, everything bursts forth. And that's what meditation is. It's opening that closet in your mind and allowing some of that stuff to be organized and to leave. So daily silent meditation, morning, perhaps evening, would be my number one tool.
That is beautiful, and I completely agree with that. Kristen, go ahead.
I
You were
was going
going
to
to say.
say thank you for the Friends reference, one of my favorite shows. Amazing.
So good. Soon that's gonna be a reference that we'll talk about and people will be like, "What? Friends?"
That will be a sad day.
We'll keep the legacy.
It will be. Oh,
It's amazing. Well, go ahead, Louisa.
Kema, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us today. From your Reiki practice to your spiritual coaching and your death doula services, and the information you've shared have been such powerful tools to tap into our own healing and transformation. And I want to thank you
Yeah,
for
you're
that.
welcome, and thanks for having me. I was really looking forward to this for a few months actually, because we talked on Messenger a while ago, and so yeah, I'm glad to be here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's been such an eye-opening conversation. So, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Mhm.
And for our listeners, whether it's healing trauma, shifting your mindset, or connecting with the energy around us, it's all available to you to make the best of it. And Kema, you've shown us how to live with more intuition, peace, and purpose. Thank you for that.
Yeah, and thank you.
And for our listeners, if you're feeling inspired to explore these practices or begin your own journey, reach out to Kema. We will be placing all of the contact information for Kema in our show notes and in the YouTube description. Kema, do you have a website you want to shout
Yeah,
out?
so my website is unwavering-grace.com. That's my
Yeah.
website. It's a good way to just see where everything that I do located in one spot, or almost everything that I do. And so also a lot of the videos and video podcasts that I've done are going to be placed on there for an easy link to them as well.
So reach out to Kema to begin your healing journey and to have a holding hand through it all as well if you are interested in this journey.
And as always, keep challenging the norms, stepping into your power. All right, free spirits, that's all the time we have for today on Flying Upstream.
We hope this episode sparked your curiosity and ignited a desire to explore the extraordinary paths less traveled.
Even when the current feels strong, a whole world of possibilities awaits.
We'll see you next time on the other side of mainstream.
So keep questioning, keep challenging, and most importantly, keep flying upstream.